It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and here to talk about how to raise our kids specifically for their vocations is John and Claire Grabowski. Thanks for being here, John and Claire.
Oh, thank you for having us, Kyle.
Great to be with you.
So you have 5 kids. So have they all found their vocations?
Great question. One of the things we talk about in the book is that every Christian, once they're baptized, has a vocation, and that's a vocation to holiness. So I think each of them is in the process of discovering that and working it out. And then if you discover a call to a specific state in life, marriage, religious life, that's a vocation within a vocation. It's a further call the Lord gives you. So your path to holiness now goes through this particular person or community. 2 of our sons are married. We have 3 daughters, 3 adult daughters, one still in college, but they are not married.
Mm-hmm.
And they're
not in religious life, so who knows
they're
what...
open and discerning. The Lord's called to them.
Well, that whole discernment process, I think, is a big part of why you wrote this book. So why do you think that the family is such an important part of helping kids discern this vocation within a vocation?
Well, I guess I'll begin by just saying that it's in the family where we come to know love. And through experiencing the love of our parents and siblings, we are experiencing God's love. And I think it's really important that we realize that it's knowing God's love that we come to be able to hear God speak to us. And in that way, we are able to follow his will in our vocation. So the family is the place where God puts each and every person when they are born. And that is how we come to know the Lord and hopefully hear his voice.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the church calls the family a domestic church. It's a little miniature church. So it's a place where we encounter the Lord. It's a place where hopefully our capacity to hear him speak to us is nurtured over time.
So
can you share a little bit about your upbringing and how that influenced your vocational discernment?
That's interesting. Well, I guess for me, I grew up on Long Island, and my parents were devout Catholics. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and I was very close to my parents, especially my mother. And I participated in the life of the church with them, receiving all the sacraments, going to Mass regularly, going to daily Mass during Advent and Lent. And I really saw the Lord working in my parents' lives, and especially my mother. My mother and I had a great close relationship. I would say from an early age, seeing how my mother loved me and how she used her gifts to serve people in our community, I wanted to be just like her. And I knew I wanted to be a wife and mother, I can say, since I was about 5 years old. I had to discern that as I got older, but in my heart, I always knew I wanted that vocation.
And like Claire, I was the youngest of 4 kids in a Catholic family. I guess you could say kind of went through a rebellious phase as a teenager and kind of got distant from the faith, but had a conversion or reversion experience while in high school and became part of a youth group. Started going to Steubenville youth conferences, decided that would be a really great place to go to school, which is where I met this girl named Claire on our come and see weekend. And we developed a good friendship and started dating actually our freshman year. But in the back of my head, I had this little nagging doubt that maybe God was calling me to priesthood. I wasn't sure. So we actually stopped dating for about a semester during our sophomore year, and Claire's friends all hated me and thought I was the biggest jerk on campus. But I really needed to hear what God wanted for me and what he was calling me to. So that time was really helpful to me because it solidified for me that the Lord was calling me to marriage. And then we started dating and actually were married 2 weeks before we graduated.
Claire, can you talk a little bit about this difference between when you were a kid, when you were 5 years old, knowing that you were going to be a wife and a mother versus when you were older, you said you had to discern that?
Well, when we were in college, we had a great influence on learning to pray daily and learning to listen to the Lord. And of course, we were encouraged to discern where God was calling us. So I took my household went on a couple of different retreats, and there were religious people in the area that, I talked to. But it wasn't until there were two times that I knew I had picked the right vocation. One, I would say it was in college when I was just praying about my relationship with John, and God showed me that one of my favorite verses is God gives us the desires of our heart. And I have come to really see that He not only gives us the desires of our hearts, but I really believe He places those desires in our hearts. At least for me, that's the way He speaks to me. So the desire to be married was very strong, and I never really felt the calling to join a religious order. And then after John and I were married, I think I was pregnant with our second child. And for some reason, I went on a silent retreat at a convent. Not that that's bad, but it really, it was hard for me because, one, I was pregnant and uncomfortable sleeping in a different bed, and two, it was silent and I had no one to talk to. And and actually, I don't even know if I talked to I think I talked to a spiritual director, but I just realized that this being alone, it was not the call for me. I came home and I said to John, well, I am sure I picked the right vocation. Yeah. So I just knew that, those desires in my heart for family life were put there by God. And I'm so grateful that He helped me to see that.
We're talking with John and Claire Grabowski. The book is Raising Catholic Kids for the Vocations. And what are some of the things that you did with your children to help them in their discernment process?
Well, we tried to create an atmosphere and environment in our home where they could encounter the Lord in different ways. So we prayed with our kids. Even when they were little, we would do morning prayer and we would sing songs and read Bible stories or things from the lives of the saints. And at night, we would all do night prayer and do a family examination of conscience and ask each other's forgiveness, including Claire and I. When we lost it with the kids during the day, we'd come back to them and ask their forgiveness for that. Sunday Mass was a non-negotiable good for us, and it was the highlight of our week. Going to Mass together, daily Mass when we could. We took them to adoration, as they got older, to youth retreats. We prayed a family rosary. Some of our kids write about that in the book. Every time we got in the car for a long trip, first thing, family rosary. Nope, take those headphones out of your ears. It's family rosary. So there were just things that were part of our life, part of the fabric of our life. And one of the things we had our kids actually write part of a chapter in the book and talk about what things in our family's life really help the faith take root in them and become real to them. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things was, even though it was the same environment, we did the same things, different things worked for different children. Different things really touched them and helped nurture the gift of faith that the Lord put in them in their baptism.
And the one thing that I would add is we had a lot of friends part of religious communities. We had a lot of priest friends. John has seminarians that he works with, and we invited them for dinner. We invited them to be part of our family life. So we exposed the children to what it was like to be in religious life. And we also do marriage preparation, and our children knew that we were always working with couples preparing them for marriage. So they knew both vocations were out there and an option, and I think that was good for them to see that God leads people in different directions.
Right. What about the whole concept of listening to God? I think that can be a hard thing to explain to a young person and a hard thing for them to be able to grasp whenever they don't feel like God is saying anything to them. How do you teach them to listen to God?
That's interesting because John and I listen and hear God in different ways. Uh-huh. And I can remember at least twice different children came to us and asked how we discern. And So we both shared. For me, like I shared earlier, I know in my heart what God is saying. So when I'm discerning something, I do a lot of Bible reading and Lives of the Saints. And I also look for signs of God speaking to me through my daily activities, through nature. And when I come down to discern something, when I sit down and I say, okay, God, I think this is what you're calling me to do, I just know it in my heart. I just have this feeling. And John has a really hard time understanding that, and he discerns in a different way, and I'll let him just share that.
So, yeah, I find that baffling, really puzzling, to be honest. So
Awesome.
I'm very much a head person. It's an occupational hazard, I guess, for a professor. So I really like Ignatian 4-column discernment, where you write out the question in 2 different ways. You list all the pros and all the cons you can come up with for each. And what I find is that lets my head kind of exhaust itself, putting down everything I can possibly think of. And then once I get that all down, and then I can let the Holy Spirit start to show me my motivations and show me, well, that's all fear and that's all this kind of worry, and that. Then I can start to let some of those go. And finally, my heart and head get quiet enough together where I can hear that, what Scripture calls that still small voice, as Elijah heard out in the cave at Horeb, speaking to me. But what Claire and I found as a couple over the years is when we both take time to really listen and seek the Lord's voice and discern, even though we listen very differently, we get to the same place together. And so we've shared that with our kids, and we've just shared, this is what works for me, this is what works for Mom. And so they've kind of
and it's
found their own way.
Just because John's a man doesn't mean the boys are going to pray just like him. I know our son, when he was discerning some big decisions, John told him how he prays. And a few days later, he came back and he said, "That's not me, Dad." He said, "I'm a lot more like Mom." So that it's good to see that God, our personalities are all different, and we have to try different things.
And as Claire shared earlier, talking to other people, having a spiritual director, having trusted, mature Christian friends, priests, others with some experience in listening to the Lord, discerning, is huge. It's invaluable to have that sounding board so that when we're discerning something as a couple, we try to talk to others and not just each other.
So you have spiritual advisors, or you encourage your children to have spiritual advisors, or both?
One of our children has a regular spiritual advisor that she meets with. We do not have regular spiritual advisors, but we do have, as Claire said, a lot of priest friends, a lot of mature Christian friends whose counsel we have sought over the years.
All right. Well, this is such a great resource and something important for all of us parents to keep in mind. So where can people get a copy of the book?
They can go on the Tan Books website, tanbooks.com. They can get it on Amazon or at their local Catholic bookstores.
All right. Again, the book is Raising Catholic Kids for Their Vocations. Authors are John and Claire Grabowski. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Hopefully, we'll walk away with some tips from this, and we can get even more from reading the book. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.